You use it every single day, right? But we almost never really think about it. I'm talking about that vast hidden network of pipes that brings clean water right to our homes. It's an absolutely essential, super complex system, and, as we're about to find out, it's also shockingly fragile.
So, let me just ask you this straight up. What would you do if you turned on your tap one morning and nothing came out? Or maybe even worse, what if the water that did come out was totally unsafe to drink? For most of us, that probably feels like something out of a movie, but it's a vulnerability that we really can't afford to ignore.
Because the truth is, for a growing number of people, clean, reliable water isn't some guarantee they can count on. It's a daily source of uncertainty. The very systems we all depend on are under an incredible amount of stress. And yeah, the cracks are definitely starting to show.
Okay, let's start with a threat that's just as invisible as the pipes themselves: cyber attacks. And no, this isn't science fiction anymore. This is a very real and growing danger to our water supply.
And look, this isn't just me speculating here. The Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, is sounding the alarm, loud and clear. They're telling us that cyber attacks targeting the very systems that control our water flow and treatment are becoming way more frequent and a lot more severe.
So how big of a problem are we talking about? Well, a recent EPA assessment found 97, that's right, 97 major U.S. drinking water systems with what they call critical or high-risk cybersecurity vulnerabilities. That's a mind-boggling number of potential targets.
And what does that mean in human terms? Well, those 97 vulnerable systems serve over 26 million Americans. That's millions and millions of people whose daily water supply could be totally disrupted by a single person with a laptop somewhere.
You know, the impact goes way beyond just being an inconvenience. It's a huge economic threat. A nationwide water service disruption for just one single day could put a staggering $43.5 billion in economic activity at risk. I mean, when the stakes are that high, this stops being just an infrastructure problem. It becomes a national security issue, period.
But these threats, they aren't just theoretical. For the city of Jackson, Mississippi, that whole what-if scenario, it became their grim reality. Back in 2022, they lived through a complete, catastrophic failure of their entire water system.
This wasn't something that just happened overnight. It was more like a slow-motion disaster. It all started with a nasty winter storm in 2021 that basically crippled their main plant. Then, a year and a half later, while the plant was still just limping along on backup pumps, heavy rains came and delivered the final blow. The whole thing failed completely, leaving 150,000 people without safe water and forcing a state of emergency.
So, what does it actually mean for your daily life when a system like this collapses? Well, the consequences are immediate, they're severe, and they're especially dangerous when it comes to public health. A study from the National Institutes of Health highlights two really distinct health threats here. First, you've got your waterborne diseases, the stuff you get from drinking contaminated water. But just as dangerous are what they call water-washed diseases. These are the infections that spread when there just isn't enough clean water for basic things like washing your hands.
And the risk is absolutely significant. Research shows that even short-term water outages cause a major spike in trips to the doctor. We're talking a 31% increased risk for gastroenteritis and even higher jumps, over a third for skin and eye diseases.
This quote from a Reddit discussion board, man, it just brings the grim reality of it all home. When the system fails, it doesn't just stop bringing you clean water. Sometimes it sends back the very thing it's supposed to take away. It's a total breakdown of modern sanitation.
And as this wastewater operator points out, the only reason this system works at all is because of people doing a really difficult, thankless job that pretty much all of us take for granted. I mean, it is the definition of out of sight, out of mind, right up until the moment it fails.
So naturally, the crisis in Jackson immediately sparked this fierce political debate. How on earth could a state capital's water system just collapse? The answers are, well, they're complicated, with some sharply different ideas about who's to blame. To even begin to understand this debate, you have to understand the city itself. Jackson's population is over 80% Black, and about a quarter of its residents live below the poverty line. These facts are right at the very heart of the entire conversation.
So, one viewpoint frames this whole thing as a slow-moving disaster that was fueled by decades of systemic problems. This includes what many critics call environmental racism, where a majority Black city's essential infrastructure was, they argue, neglected for years by state leadership.
Now, the counter-argument, which was articulated by the governor at the time, Tate Reeves, places the responsibility squarely on the local city government. His view points to what he called long-standing issues with things like billing and staffing, and a failure by the city to create a workable plan to actually fix the system itself.
But, regardless of the cause, the cost of the solution is just astronomical. Estimates to fully repair and modernize Jackson's century-old water system are as high as $2 billion. That's billion with a B.
In late 2022, Congress did allocate $600 million to help out. And while that's a huge amount of money, it's pretty clear it still leaves a massive funding gap to get that system to where it actually needs to be.
The story of Jackson is really a warning shot for every single community out there. So how can cities and towns get ready for these kinds of emergencies? What does being prepared even look like? Well, the EPA provides a pretty clear roadmap for this. The most crucial first step is having an emergency drinking water supply plan in place before a disaster ever strikes. This means figuring out alternate sources, building partnerships between the water utilities and local governments, and having things like mobile treatment systems ready to go at a moment's notice. And really, that brings us to the final critical question. The vulnerabilities are real, the consequences are severe, and the need to plan is incredibly urgent. After seeing what happened in Jackson and understanding the kinds of threats we all face, you gotta ask yourself, what's the state of that invisible lifeline flowing right underneath your own feet? It's a question we should all be asking. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.